Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Just wanted to hop on with you quickly today and react to the news as reported yesterday by ESPN's Jeremy Fowler that now, just days after John Schneider went on his radio show on Seattle Sports 710 in Seattle and tried to convince us that they really like all four quarterbacks on their roster and want to keep all four moving into camp and let Sam Howell compete with the newly re-signed Drew Lock to be Sam Darnold's backup. Fowler reporting today the Seahawks are indeed willing to trade Sam Howell, that there may be a market out there for him and some demand for him, and that a deal could get done sometime during the upcoming NFL draft, which begins next Thursday. So I just wanted to do this very quickly. Two things. How did we get here, and who might be interested in Sam Howell? How did we get here? There are those who have been critical of the move to get Sam Howell, that when you look at the trade charts, the trade swap that they pulled off with the Commanders, basically swapping places in the third and fifth round, that on the Rich Hill trade chart, which I prefer to use, it essentially equates to a fourth round pick. The Seahawks give up a fourth round value last year to acquire Sam Howell. And now that Drew Lock is back again, some of the criticism has expanded to, well, why didn't you just bring him back to begin with? Those two moves are interrelated, and Schneider did confirm this on his show on Thursday. They wanted Drew Lock back. They made him an offer. They tried to get him to come back again and back up Geno Smith last year. But Drew Lock wasn't going to have an opportunity to start here with Geno Smith in town. He did have an opportunity to start with the Giants, and in fact, the contract he signed reflected that. And if he had started the entire year, remember Daniel Jones was coming off an ACL injury, he would have made $8 million. The Seahawks weren't going to come anywhere near that last year. So they only went and got Sam Howell after Drew Lock moved on to the New York Giants. And at the time, I was in favor of the move. I have talked extensively, especially this offseason before the quarterback changes in Seattle, certainly, about how you kind of have to throw value out the window when it comes to taking shots at the quarterback position. It's such a volatile position, it's such a difficult one to find, and it is so crucial and important, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And so taking a shot on a guy who started 17 games, led the league in passing at one point, led the league in attempts, was really given no favors by Eric Bieniemy, who was the offensive coordinator there, was really kind of thrown to the wolves, but who showed upside. He was a guy I liked coming out in the draft out of North Carolina. So did John Schneider. At one point after his sophomore year, he was talked about as a potential first-round pick, and then he lost his skill position players to the NFL. He didn't have as much of a functional offense as last season at North Carolina, ran for almost 1,000 yards because that's kind of how they had to tailor the offense that year. I thought the upside for a guy that was 23 years old, younger than most of the quarterbacks in the class last year, made a lot of sense. You take a shot at a guy. At minimum, you have a cheap backup who has started 17 games in the NFL. He only cost the Seahawks $900,000 last year. So at the time, the move made sense. But almost from the day he arrived, we saw reports that, it just wasn't a comfortable fit. He didn't look good in practice. He wasn't accurate. He didn't seem to pick up the offense. I thought he looked good in the preseason, played well in those games, and showed some of the traits that I liked about him coming out of North Carolina. It may just have not been a fit offensively. And John even talked about, Schneider did on his radio show again, that he thinks this new offense would be a better fit. But then Drew Lock was available again, and they wanted to bring him back. This is a player that John Schneider has liked for a long time, going back to his draft year. And it wasn't a mistake that he was included in the Russell Wilson trade. Schneider liked him, wanted him included in that trade, demanded it as part of the deal. And so it wasn't a case necessarily of, we don't like Sam Howell, there's no future for him here, let's go get Drew Lock instead. It was, we like Lock that much. Well, now, obviously, Howell is available. They also talk about how they like Jaren Hall. And if you think that's just, if you think those are just hollow words, well, there's some action to back it up. They elevated him from the practice squad at the end of last year so that he can make some more guaranteed money. They immediately signed him to a futures deal as soon as the league year ended, or the season ended last year. And they've carried him on the 90-man roster, even though he's one of four quarterbacks. They've never carried that many quarterbacks. And then there's this draft class, which they've done some work on. They've met in Seattle with Tyler Shuck. They've met with Jalen Milroe. They've done some work on these guys and met with them elsewhere as well. And so it does make sense that Sam Howell would be available. Is there a market for him? Now, last year there was, just as a reminder, there were two other teams that were competing to acquire him at the same time, which is why the Seahawks had to step up and give fourth-round value to acquire him. And those two teams were the Denver Broncos and the LA Rams. This is widely reported. And so, regardless of what you might think of Sam Howell, Sean Payton wanted him, and so did Sean McVay. But now, the Seahawks are at a little bit of a disadvantage in trying to find a market for him because teams have either A, addressed quarterback in the offseason through trades or free agency, or B, are looking ahead to this upcoming draft and have the draft capital to take a shot at one of these appealing prospects in this class. And so it's not as big of a market. But I have come up with 4 teams that I believe would be interested in Sam Howell, would make some sense, and could make a move for him this weekend. And those 4 teams are, it's the Minnesota Vikings. First, second, third, and fourth on this list. Sorry to tease you there a little bit. Just wanted to have a little bit of fun with it. This is really the only team that makes sense as we sit here today. And in fact, as soon as the Drew Lock signing was announced, Jeff Simmons tweeted, hey, look for the Vikings to be involved in this. And the reason it makes sense is because they just don't really have anything else there at the moment. We know about J.J. McCarthy. They drafted him last year very high. They have all the high expectations for him to be their franchise quarterback. He was having a good preseason, probably at some point would have taken the reins from Sam Darnold last year, if not week 1. That's the way it was trending. And then he tore his ACL. And then there was even a setback at the end of the season. Although the reports are positive now that he'll be in good shape to be ready to go by the beginning of the season, there's just that uncertainty that coming off the ACL injury and also the fact that he hasn't started a game yet in the NFL. And so they made attempts to bring in veteran quarterbacks. They tried to bring back Sam Darnold, made him a concrete offer. They also made Daniel Jones, who was on the practice squad at the time, a concrete offer as well. Jones goes to Indianapolis for an opportunity to start. Darnold comes here to be the starter. And so the idea of bringing in somebody to hedge against McCarthy not ready to go, or just as an experienced backup and someone that could be a fit in that Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay influenced offense. Right now they have Brett Ripien. Brett Ripien, what is he? It's his 4th, 5th team. He was with the Seahawks for a minute 2 years ago. He's not a guy you could count on to start if you had to. I would argue that Sam Howell is a much more appealing young quarterback, still just 24 years old, than Brett Ripien, and he would only cost them $1 million in salary and salary cap space this year. Like, it's kind of a no-brainer. And he is a fit. O'Connell really likes some of the things we're going to see this year under Clint Kubiak with Sam Darnold. The reason he was such a fit last year, a lot of those designed rollouts and taking advantage of some of that mobility and even allowing the quarterback to use his legs a little bit. I think Howell would make a lot of sense there. Here's the problem. The Vikings only have 4 picks this year. They have the 24th pick in the draft. They have a comp pick at the end of the 3rd round, number 97. And then they have a 5th and a 6th, the number 139 that they acquired from the Cleveland Browns and number 187 that they acquired from the San Francisco 49ers. I don't know that they'd be willing to give up one of those picks. But you can make the argument that that 5th rounder might make some sense, or even the 6th. Because when trying to attach value to Sam Howell, it's hard, right? We got him last year for the equivalent of a 4th, but he was coming off a season starting 17 games. He was just 22, 23 years old. Geno Smith, a obviously much more accomplished starter, was traded for a 3rd this year. I kind of feel like that 6th rounder would sort of be it. It's the 11th pick in the 6th round, and it would have some appeal to Seattle, I think, and to me, because they don't have a 6th round pick at the moment. And I think there's value there, especially when you get down into certain positions, like some of the positions in the secondary, if they don't address it early on. It's not a great safety class. If they don't take a safety early, maybe there's a guy McDonald likes there. One of the more developmental, like offensive tackle prospects, a Bryce Cabaldo from Kansas, who they have met with, it might be in kind of that range. A Logan Brown, his teammate from Kansas, he played the left side, Cabaldo played the right side. could be in play. A Jalen Travis, who I like from Ohio State or Iowa State, or some of these smaller school guys, or another interior offensive lineman, a Jonah Monheim, the center from USC, or a Clay Webb, the guard from Jacksonville State, who I think could play center as well. Maybe Jackson Slater falls into that. There's value in that pick, and I think it might be fair value with where Sam Howell sits now, coming off a year in which he didn't make an impact and struggled reportedly in practice. And then certainly we saw, I'm kind of with John Schneider on this one. I give him a pass on the Green Bay game. He was thrust into a difficult situation, and Ryan Grubb did him no favors in that game. So Howell's available. I think the Vikings really are the only match. It still makes sense for the Rams at this point. They brought Jimmy Garoppolo back, but he's not the long-term answer there. I expect the Rams to draft a quarterback this year, maybe with their first pick. I think they're picking at 26. I could see them throwing a wrench in the Giants and Cleveland Browns' plans to move up from the first round, because if Jackson Dart gets to 26, I could see the Rams taking him. I could see him taking a shot on Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, one of those guys as well, Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord. They all make sense at some point. But I just don't see that happening within the division. I don't see the Rams wanting to give us an extra draft pick, and I don't see Schneider wanting to give them Sam Howell. So I think it's the Vikings, and the Vikings only. The only question would be, do we see a move this weekend? Here's another possibility. I will leave you with this. It could end up being a 2026 pick as well. This could be a situation where the Vikings, maybe there's a guy they like in the draft and they want to address it there. And we get to day 3 before a decision's made. And then at that point, maybe all they're willing to give up is a pick in next year's draft. And maybe it's conditional. If he ends up playing a certain amount of games, maybe he ends up starting. If McCarthy's not ready to go, or he aggravates that injury, where, maybe it does end up getting as high as a 4th, recoup the value you got for him. So it's definitely something to watch for. I would expect it to happen after the draft starts instead of before the draft. But I do think this, based on these reports, and Jeremy Fowler is one of the best in the business. He's very, very connected. I don't think there's any way that Sam Howell's on the roster in July when training camp opens, and I would highly doubt that he's even on the roster when they have their first full roster mandatory mini camp after the draft before we get to training camp. So that's where we sit with that. Also today just dropped, based on reporting by Diana Rossini and Jonathan Jones, that the New York Giants are looking to trade up potentially from the beginning of the second round into the first round to get a quarterback, either Shadur Sanders or Jackson Dart, and that the Seahawks might be a logical trade partner as they look to get ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Check out that episode. I put together an actual trade offer that I think is based in reality. It's based off the trade charts and the Lamar Jackson trade back in 2018. So check that out as well. And then join me Monday for my final official predictive mock draft, where I try to predict what the Seahawks will do after months of speculating what they should do or what they could do. This is where I try to get it right. So check that out. And then again, live watch parties all throughout the first 2 days of the draft. Lots of special guests involved. Come watch and celebrate or lament some of the picks along the way as the Seahawks sit today with 5 in the first 92. Lots coming up. It is draft week. Thank you for watching. I'm Dan, at Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.